2, 3.
My name is Karen Hill. This is the Oral History of Social Work in Canada project, a project of the Canadian Association of Social Workers. Today is the 4th of May, 1984, and I'm in Calgary. Today I'm interviewing Father Pat O'Byrne, who's had long experience in social work in Alberta.
On the avenue, 1 block from here, 17th Avenue, Calgary. In August 22nd, 1914. And so I'm a real homer. I'm hanging around the place.
You haven't moved too far from home, have you?
Hanging around everything except the time.
Were there things about your early life here in Calgary that affected your later career as a social worker?
Oh, I think my father affected my general attitude to the community. He was very involved in the community, and one thing I remember him doing was to gather about him a group of people to start the Sonalta Community Club, which built rinks and recreation facilities. I think it was probably Calgary's first community club. And he let us know that that's the way we should operate. We should put together everybody across denominational lines. We belonged to the local parish, and he let it be known that because we went to the local parish for schooling didn't mean we were going there for hockey, and that we would be a part of the total community for sports and other things. I think I had a lot of that drilled into me. I think that I was very impressed with his friendship with our next door neighbor, who was a Baptist. And when this Baptist moved in, he said that hoped that we didn't play sports on Sundays. And my father had a long conversation with him and found out that they went to church 3 times on Sundays, to First Baptist Church, to the Abrahams Church, and to the Foursquare. And so he came and announced to us that we wouldn't play any sports on Sundays, except when the Baptists were at church. And we were always kind of glad they went quite often. But anyway, we were kind of brought up to respect people of other religions and to work with them and play with them. And I think that I remember in my father was active in the Knights of Columbus. And then he became an officer in the Elks. And I remember some of the Knights of Columbus saying, well, he shouldn't go to the Elks, he should stay with the Knights of Columbus. And I remember him making a big issue of that the fact that you spent some time for your congregation to which you prayed didn't mean that you'd limit yourself to that. And he made a big issue of the fact that he was going to go out and be a big elk. And I think I picked up those things. Maybe I was listening for them more than anything else, that you had to go out and relate to the total community.
Where were you during the Depression, Father Pat?
In Calgary, going to University of Toronto. My father died in 28, and his business was sold before the Depression, and I was just talking to a young man of a New York life insurance company at noon today. He comes to my church at noon. I said, you know, we were New York life insurance orphans because everybody criticized my father for having too much life insurance with your company. But we benefited by it. And so during the Depression, I finished his grade 12 here in Calgary and went on to Toronto University, and because there was sufficient money in my father's estate to handle it.
How did you decide to go to University of Toronto rather than someplace closer to home?
Oh, well, that was easy. First of all, I wanted to get away from everybody around here, get away from home. But also I had in my mind that I might be a priest. And I was highly recommended that St. Michael's College in Toronto would be the best place to train for that.
Mm-hmm.
And also I knew it was a good place to train for hockey, and I might be a hockey player. And so it had a lot of assets that the local Edmonton didn't have.
Mm-hmm. And you did indeed decide to become a priest and were ordained in 1944, I believe it was.
1940,
1940. Where did you go after that?
right here,
You came back to Calgary.
St. Mary's Cathedral. I was stationed here.
It amazes me to talk to a person who has stayed so close to home.
Yeah.
What happened to lead you on toward social work?
Well, after I went to seminary, I kind of made a deal with the bishop that I'd be able to go to graduate school, and I hoped that would mean theology, but I kept bugging him to let me go to graduate school, and eventually he said it would mean social work, and so we picked out a school of social work, and I went to social work school, kind of against my better judgment, but knowing that, well, if I want to get to graduate school, I guess I'll better take this dumb course.
Why was social work against your better judgment?
Well, I'd say that social work was never heard of in Calgary. And when I came home from the school of social work, I was maybe the first one to arrive in Calgary from school of social work.
And when did you come back from St. Louis?
Oh, about 1946.
What was happening in Calgary at the time as far as social issues go and that sort of thing?
Well, I met an exciting gal about the day I came home.
Who was that?
The bishop didn't know what to do with me, but he said, I got a problem. He said, now, I was the administrator of Toronto Diocese before I came to Calgary, and we had a kind of a mess in the Children's Aid Society. And I wrote to the Canadian Welfare Council and asked them to send Dr. Whitten in to straighten it out, and she really straightened it out. And when she was leaving, I said, Dr. Whitten, if there's anything I can ever do for you, don't hesitate to call on me. And here now she's written me a letter, and she's coming to Calgary with the IODE, and she wants me to cooperate, and I have to cooperate now. So you go down and have lunch with her at the palace, or she's down there, and find out what she wants, and we'll cooperate with whatever she wants. And so Charlotte Whitten had her put inside the door of welfare in Calgary through Bishop Carroll, not knowing that she was eventually going to find the evidence for the abuse of child care right in the Catholic institutions, and that, particularly in the province creche. And so she got him to sign a letter, get the superior to sign a letter that she had open access to all the records, and so I got involved with Charlotte Whitten.
So how was that first lunch with Dr. Whitten?
Well, I was very excited that she was from Ottawa too, you know, and I have connections in Ottawa. I've lived in Ottawa, and we compare notes. In fact, her on her mother's side were Burns, the same as mine, and we kind of talked about our connections up at Iron Prior. Oh, it was very exciting, but you see, I didn't know what I was going to do. There was no Catholic charities here, and I didn't know where we were going to start. But she came along, and she made me a deal, and I made her a deal. She checked out from the people in Calgary that I was quite involved in, the Council of Social Agencies. I had been before I went to university, and I got back involved again when I came back. And that I didn't mind trying to put together organizational packages in the town. And so she decided that what she wanted to do was to educate Albertans, and she might as well start with Calgarians, since the IODE gals were here in Calgary, our committee, as to what social work was. And when I said to you, I didn't know what social work was, nobody in Calgary knew what social work was. We'd never heard of social work. The provincial government wouldn't hire a social worker, nor the city. And so when I was going away to social work, Charlie Hill, who was your uncle, I guess, is he?
No relation.
Up in Edmonton, he told the bishop to send Father O'Byrne up and work in my office for a couple of months. He'd learn more than he would going to school of social work. So that was kind of, in the air.
Was that before you went to the School of Social Work in
Yeah.
St. Louis?
Mm-hmm.
So did you go to Edmonton with Charlie Hill?
No, I didn't. But the feelings were never very good. He never looked upon me as too sympathetic. Because I didn't go, no. But anyway, Charlotte decided that she was going to put on a course and that I knew my way around this organization. And I had actually said to this organization, you know what we need is a course in social work to educate the people of Calgary about social work. Here I was home from the School of Social Work, and I wanted to bring up the standards of the general public because there were a lot of good people, but they had never heard. There was no university here. They'd never heard anything. And so our group put together Charlotte Whitten, and Charlotte Whitten came and said, I'll provide you with lectures. For 6 Thursdays in a row, I'll put the stars from the continent in here, and every Thursday at Western Canada High School, and you can draw, you can fill a place. So we drew 500 to 1,000 people out on Thursdays.
Can I ask you, Father Pat, who were some of the speakers that were such a draw?
Yeah. Pat from Vancouver,
Pat Fulton?
Pat Fulton. White, the Minister of Welfare for Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
Father, the Director of Catholic Family Service of Ottawa, Father.
John MacDonald?
Yeah, John MacDonald. And then she went into Chicago. And she had apparently given speeches to the United Way of Chicago in return for a favor. So she came around collecting her favors. And she brought in 3 stars from Illinois who were really entertaining. And she told them all areas to cover. They were all on child. And so that was a big thing, and that kept me going pretty well. That kept me going in the fall and then into the spring. And then it was decided that my association with Charlotte Whitten wasn't doing me any good politically. The Alberta government, or the bishop said, no use you going into social work now. There's some mad at you for being with Charlotte Whitten.
So you had gone to the School of Social Work in St. Louis, come back and organize these meetings with Dr. Whitten, and then all of a sudden social work wasn't a good idea for you?
It wasn't a very good idea for me to be running around with Charlotte Whitten.
Had her report come out by
You'd have to realize that Bishop Carroll was a very timid man, and although he was honorable and he did help Rhoda as he said he would, he was a very timid man. So he said to me, well, take your time. And then it got more involved than that. When I was at School of Social Work in St. Louis, I made a deal with Jack MacDonald at Ottawa that I would do everything in St. Louis except my last block of clinical time, which I do with him to get a Canadian experience rather than an American experience. And this was set up in correspondence between my supervisors at St. Louis and Jack MacDonald, and agreed by everybody. And it was generally agreed that I'd go back there sometime within the next year or so after I got here. got settled and decided what we were going to go into, and again, because of the mood of the province about Charlotte Whitten, and that anybody who would run with her was never going to do with welfare around here, that it was decided that I wouldn't bother going back to School of Social Work, and that I wouldn't bother setting up a social work in Calgary, and I went out to the country and took a parish for 10 years. And I went into my first love, which was group work,
Mm-hmm.
which I had specialized in at St. Louis.
So this was still, you must not have been in Calgary very long then, coming back to St. Louis and then going out to Claire's home?
Yeah, I went out within less than a year. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So what did you do during that 10 years in Claire's home?
I ran the group programs, which while I was in St. Louis, if there were two options that I was most interested in, and one was youth work and the other was labor unions. And I had a good story later on both of those. As far as the youth is concerned, the senior Catholic youth organizations of the continent were there. Father Dan Lord and his organization, and St. Louis is a kind of a Catholic town. It's half Catholic, and it's very heavy on organizations. And so I attended the classes in social work, group work, and then went over and checked out what was going on the other side of the house. And so by the time I got to Claire's home and decided to go to this group work thing, I was coming out of quite a bit of interest from my social work experience, my group social work experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent 10 years in it, and then I came back into Calgary and opened up Catholic Charities.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so happy with it that I didn't have any urgings to come back into Calgary
You were so happy with Claire's home?
with doing this group work business.
What kinds of problems were you seeing in Claire's home that you used the groups to work on them?
Problems were not just problems in Claire's home. I published programs for all the Catholic youth organizations of Canada, and I traveled across the country teaching the method of how to program these. I went to Ottawa. Father before they went to Carleton, anyway, under St. Pat's.
Swithin Bowers?
Yeah, with Swithin Bowers. And we gathered together a team and did Canada. Our main one was Banff, but we did all Canada, and they were not problems of a local community as much as problem of to try to get some intelligence and academic standards into the programs of Catholic youth organizations, which would easily go social and athletic and dramatic, and we were trying to get them to be more mature than that.
What kinds of other things or other areas did you want them to be involved in?
They were, if they joined this program, which was called the Dandelion Program. Did I send you a copy of it?
No.
Can I stand up?
Sure, if you take your microphone off. Just unhook it. that off for a minute if you could. When we stopped, Father Pat, you were talking about the Dandelion program and how it was going to expand the area's involvement for the Catholic youth organizations. So what was Dandelion?
Oh, Dandelion was the name that was given to this program as a joke, and which caught on. It was a fourfold program: spiritual, apostolic, social, and educational. And some fellow one day said that Dandelion covers those very well. The green leaf, the social; the deep root, the spiritual; the tall stem, the educational; and the terrific dispersion of seeds, the apostolic influence that we want to have in our communities.
Uh-huh.
And it just sort of caught on.
Yeah.
And
Do you want to see that?
no.
No. I appreciate your giving me that manual. I'll copy it and return it. And you developed this and then went across Canada training groups as to how to use it. Is that it?
Yes, we trained people in this 4-program method, and it suited the youth of those days. And then came the 60s and the enlightenment of youth, and they didn't need help as to how to entertain themselves or etc. But we went out of in 1956. I turned it over to St. Patrick's College. They took on the Dandelion, the publishing of the programs, and they kept it for a couple of years, and they ran into this cultural revolution of youth, and it was untimely for them to take it over.
So,
I unloaded it at a good time.
pardon me?
I unloaded it at a good time.
So it didn't do very well after that. Huh?
No, they stopped publishing after a couple of years.
Yeah, yeah. You were in Claresholm from 1946 to 1955, was it?
Yes.
Yeah. How did it happen that you came back to Calgary?
Because the bishop decided to invite me to start Catholic Charities, which he had thought of doing 10 years ago, and then I think because of the Charlotte Whitten hassle, he gave up the thought and postponed it.
Had you been involved in that first attempt in 1946 or whenever it was?
No, we didn't really do anything. We just thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
I was around here, and I was getting my feet wet in the community. I was on the board of the Calgary Family Service Bureau and the Council of Social Agencies, and the board of Lacombe Home and the Province Creche, and I was involved in all of those kind of board level kind of things, but we hadn't yet set up an office.
Father Pat, was your board involvement before you went to Claresholm or after?
Oh, both.
Both. I want to go back for just a second then. You mentioned some time ago in the interview that the creche, the Province Creche, is that what you call it?
Providence Creche.
Providence Creche was one of the organizations that was criticized by Dr. Whitten. Were you on the board too at the same time that criticism was coming to that organization?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, what kind of a spot did that put you in, to be on the receiving end of the criticism of somebody that you were supposed to be
Well, the
helping?
criticism was really of the provincial government, not of the Providence Creche. Because Sister John of the Cross, a nurse from St. Paul's in Vancouver, who was the director of the Providence Creche, told Charlotte that they were taking babies away from her who were not mentally competent and who were showing negative blood. And she told Charlotte, and all that the Providence Creche could do was house the children that the provincial government brought to it. It didn't have any rights or any decisions. And she told them about a certain foster home, or boarding house she called it, out in Montgomery, where there were 15 children. And she said that those children came from here, and we think that 2 of them are retarded and they've been adopted. And we think that 2 of them have positive blood and they've been adopted.
Mm-hmm.
And so Sister John was in danger of giving out this information. Providence could come along and say, "We won't give you any more children if you..." And no doubt they put pressure on Bishop Carroll later on to discipline Sister John not to give any more information to Charlotte Whitten, but she already did it. But within weeks, one of the children that she had said was retarded had been killed by its foster parents as they had pumped gas from their car into the kitchen and gassed their kid. And so this broke loose where this child came from. It was a provincial ward, you see. And so Charlotte was sitting on all the stuff. And this was one of her big cases in her court case.
That was one of the ones that was used in evidence in there was some kind of lawsuit, or maybe a couple of lawsuits that resulted from the Whitten inquiry, weren't there?
Yeah. Oh yeah, she was sued for saying something in the Liberty magazine that about the government, and I forget what it was, but generally it was that the government was adopting Catholic children to Mormon homes in Utah. And she was playing, of course, Charlotte was rough. And she was playing right into bigotry there.
Mm-hmm.
And she got the government where it hurt, because the government had always bragged about the fact that it was able to get so many of its children adopted into Utah who it couldn't get adopted into Alberta, you see. And so she stirred all up that and got... Oh, the thing went on for months here. Pat Fulton was in here, and Jack McDonald was in here.
They were part of the investigation team, weren't they?
Well, she called them to testify as to the kind of things they found when they came to Alberta.
So when you came back to Calgary in 1957, or 1957 was it?
56.
1956, almost 10 years after the Whitten report, were there still leftovers from that report of the period before?
Oh yes, some, but I kind of ignored them. Even during the 10 years, I had called on the provincial government as a Catholic representative, trying to do business about adoptions and foster homes and things like that, and had presumed, well, that's all over now, 5 years ago or something like that. But some people kept telling me it wasn't over, but when I came back into Calgary and worked for Catholic Family Service, I presumed that it was all over and that most of the people who were now senior people in the Department of Child Welfare had gotten courses in social work and had got a decent education and were able to laugh about things the same as I was, and so it had kind of passed over.
And that was true, that the people had gotten education and they were able to laugh about it?
Yeah. They educated a lot of their staff, mostly at UBC.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I was soon on committees. I remember trying to get association of welfare workers going in Calgary. And we already had the CASW, but we decided we needed an association of welfare workers to cover all the provincial and the city people who weren't in any association. And maybe the CSW would be in it too, and they'd have two memberships and give support to it. And so, and the people from Edmonton would come down and were certainly supportive of me trying to do this because they felt that I was trying to help their position to get their people into some kind of a licensed, or it wasn't licensed then, but anyway, eventually some kind of a registered association.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of time on that group, and we also spent a lot of time imagining Mount Royal College eventually getting into the School of Social Work business. And then we decided that we should go for the University of Calgary. Mm-hmm. And that was in '68. I was, I think, the president of the local CASW at the time. And we made it our sort of our pitch for the year to get School of Social Work in Calgary.
And how did you do? Were you successful in?
No, we got it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was kind of funny that we decided to keep this under the Calgary branch because we knew that if it ever got to Edmonton, Edmonton would want it, and we'd never hear any more about it because they'd be bigger than us. And they're better than us in hockey and everything else, you see. So we decided to keep it our own. And so we did Calgary-type things. We went to the Junior League. We got them to back it, the study, and put up $10,000. And they put up the money and they put good gals on it. And then we went around the town and got good chairmen. Remember, we got Dr. Gogan of the Holy Cross Hospital as the chairman of the board. And we got quite a powerful committee, and we eventually decided that we wanted a School of Social Work in Calgary. We went to the university and we got it.
Mm-hmm. Who were some of the other people who were involved in that with you, some of the other social workers?
Well, Tim Tyler, who eventually became the director for the first 10 years. Mm-hmm. And the psychologist up at the university, Scheinheider. No, that isn't his name. What's the name of the psychologist up at the university, Don?
There's a few of them. I have no idea.
Mrs. McGilvery was very active on it.
Mm-hmm.
Her husband was Chief Justice Bill McGilvery.
Mm-hmm.
And but we studied that quite thoroughly and did a fairly good research job on it, and then took it to the CASW that should be a School of Social Work in Calgary, and it was politically active as well as academically. Also, Calgary University needs it. Calgary University didn't have too many apartments.
So they wanted to grow, and your proposal came at a time that was good for the university as well.
Yeah.
Do you want to stop for a second?
No. You notice my hand shaking?
Yeah, and I didn't.
That's nothing to do with it shakes anyway.
No, I didn't think it had anything to do with the interview, but.
No, I'm on lithium.
And that causes that.
Makes my hand shake.
Yeah, yeah. Anytime you want to stop, just ask.
No.
Again, then, when you came back to Calgary around 1955, what was the social work situation like then? There was no school of social work here in Alberta in 1955. Were there more social workers then?
Yes, there were more social workers, and the message had got out that government should hire social workers, at least in supervisory roles, and the situation was improving in the provincial government particularly, and improving in the city of Calgary, so yes, there were more social workers. Sonovia Addy was here.
Now that's a name I haven't heard for a while. Who was she? It was this woman, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Who was she?
She was director of the Calgary Family Service Bureau. And Sonovia.
And was there a professional association at that time in Calgary?
CASW? Oh, yes. In fact, yeah, even when there are only half a dozen CSW members here, they had an association. And Sonovia was the chairman of that for a while.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She's in Ottawa, isn't she?
I don't know. I have not heard the name for years, and it just, I don't even know where I heard it last. So when you came back to Calgary, then you began to try to start the Catholic, was it Catholic Family Services or Catholic Charities?
Both.
How did you go about those tasks?
Well, we set up Catholic Charities as a sort of a board in the diocese with authority over the total situation. We set up Catholic Family Service in different towns as under them: Medicine Hat, Lethbridge, Blairmore, and Catholic Family Service was, of course, just a local counseling agency with its own local board.
Mm-hmm. Did you get much opposition from the other family service organizations that might have existed at the time?
The only opposition we got was in Calgary. And we didn't get it from Sonovia, but from the United Fund in Calgary, which couldn't see why we need two family agencies. One would do. And they asked me how I thought I was going to get the Catholic Family Service accepted in the United Fund without having written a letter a year ahead. I said, well, you better go and ask your executive director what he did with the letter I wrote him a year ahead. And so they dug out the fact that there was a letter came in and he hadn't brought it to a meeting. And so I had been on Council of Social Agency long enough to know that I had to apply. Also, and they put the two most powerful women in Calgary on this committee to interview me. or Moses Eamon, who later was the head of the children's, or later as the head of the Vanny Institute, I guess. There's a Jewess from Calgary. And Gertie Lang was the head of the Canadian Welfare Council. And so they interviewed me as to how I was going to get the money to start an agency. And I said, well, luckily you said that I had to get the money for the first year. You weren't going to give me my first year. And I got it. And how'd you get it? Fumbling around. So, every time I met Moses or Gertie Lang on the street ever since then, they say, now what are you fumbling at this week?
Enough money to run an agency for a year. So did the agency get into United Way?
Oh yeah, I got in. And of course they were dead when they accused me of not applying, and the executive director hadn't bothered producing it. So by the time they got back and got that out, they were in no shape to take me on. And so I had to add a collection in the Catholic churches for 2 years, and I had the collection for 2 years added up to enough to handle us. Yeah, we picked up, we started off picking up $18,000 a year, I remember. But anyway, we got through, and of course I immediately started hiring stars.
Who did you hire?
Frank Bach, who is professor at the university now. I hired him out of Walla Walla, Washington.
Were there other stars that you recollect as having helped these agencies get off to a good start?
Well, yeah. John Farry, who's went from us to Edmonton to the Misericordian.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Kane, who's back at Spokane. But
Mm-hmm. When was it that the Calgary Interfaith Action Committee got underway?
well, I would say that almost simultaneous to starting Catholic Charities, we started interfaithish kind of activities, because the bishop kind of wanted me to start something for the transient men. And I was talking to other churches, and they did too. And I thought it was an obvious area to work together on rather than start something separate.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of the beginning of interfaithish things. And we found that once we got together, that there was a sort of an interest in getting together. Vatican II was just over, and the Catholic Church had backed away from its arrogant position of going alone on so many things. And I think there was a sort of an interest in the part of the clergy of the other church to say, well, let's see it. That's right. We'll cooperate if you will. And so we just, things that would come to our notice that we would be involved in, the matter of international development has got into every Catholic charities across the country and every Lutheran an Anglican across the country, that you don't just do something for your own, you do something for the internationally undeveloped countries. And so we got into that and went together on it in our Miles for Millions. And we were most successful, and it sort of the idea of it being many churches was of interest, sort of caught on the community. And I think that it was that in those years that whatever we touched would have the same, and maybe particularly TV. Maybe after we got on TV, it was easier than ever because we got to be better known, and we'd get more invitations to go places, to banquets, to speak, because you were on TV, and it all accumulated. The fact that we made it on TV, it was partly the fact that we bothered, that we wanted to make it on TV, because we took a very difficult time, 11:45 a.m. Sunday morning, and sponsored by Arthur Murray Dance Studio. And we had all kinds of oppositions of, why do you let Arthur Murray Dance Studio sponsor you? They're a no good outfit. I say, well, fine, when somebody else that's a good outfit comes along, we'll let them sponsor us. But we were sufficiently interested in putting out ideas. And so I think the fact that we did hang in there and stay with it when it was not easy was part of the reason why we got so much attention, that it wasn't sort of just a glamour thing.
So you were using the media to publicize the organization?
Well, we're using the media to discuss the problems of the organization. If we had a problem of an organization, a problem of transient men, we'd have a couple men on the program and interview them and talk about that. And we'd have some people from an undeveloped country on, and so we actually talked about educational depth for the things that we believed in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the organization was doing public education, and you were starting services, like to transient men, and doing some kind of activity in international development. Were there other activities of the agency?
You mean of interfaith?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I suppose that there were, besides the direct services that came along, besides the educational one, were first of all international development and then native development. We got very involved with the Indians. All of our churches were involved in the Indian Reserves when we put this together.
Mm-hmm.
Then housing. We got into housing. The city of Calgary was not going to have any public housing. This was a statement made by the council. And so we went out and built the first public housing, interfaith housing, which we built 4 units, and they still exist. So we got into the housing field to prove that the city should be in it. In the inner city, besides being helpful to the men, transient men, who are very involved in all of the planning of downtown, with the hope that downtown would be helpful to the poor people rather than be a problem to them.
Mm-hmm.
The three family agencies came together under our auspices.
Did they amalgamate?
No, they didn't amalgamate, but they worked very close together. The Old Y project. We took on the Old Y. There were a group of youth agencies wanted to have the Old Y for their offices, and the city wouldn't give it to them. But they said they'd give it to us, so we got involved to become kind of the sponsors. And we then kind of gave the tone to the Old Y.
Mm-hmm.
And of course we got involved up at the university in School of Social Work first, and then Religious Studies.
That was another program that the Interfaith Action Committee got going
Yeah,
up there.
Religious Studies.
Mm-hmm. How is the Interfaith Action Committee different from a social planning organization? I work with social planning councils and have some understanding of them, but what's the difference between the two?
Actually, I discussed several times with people in the community that interfaith could become like a religion wing of the social planning if the social planning wanted it to. There was nothing about that couldn't happen. There's nothing generically different, except that by working together, Interfaith kept a lot of churches involved that wouldn't ordinarily be involved. A lot of churches just sort of keep a little bit apart.
Mm-hmm.
But Interfaith dug them out and got them involved.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that probably down the line, that's, We also got involved in Lake Louise. We objected to Lake Louise being developed as a millionaire's paradise there, and be kept for poorer things. And our brief was quoted by the provincial government, so we.
Mm-hmm. Is the organization still going?
Oh yes.
During the years, you were executive director, I guess, of the Interfaith Action Committee for a while.
Yes.
During what period of time were you doing that?
Oh, I guess from 66. '66, '77, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm. What other activities were you involved in during that period of time?
Well, I got my feet wet in politics, but I got a cold out of it.
What happened?
Well, I lost. I ran social credit. You were asking me whether or not there was any hindrance for me getting back involved with provincial government because of my running with Charlotte Whitten. And I said, no, that all died. In fact, they offered me a nomination for a social credit seat in '69,
Mm-hmm.
which meant they had forgiven me.
Yeah.
And I ran, and I got elected, and they got elected. Peter Naheed got in. But that was I guess, is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of your work sounds as though it has had a political, not necessarily a party politics, but a political sort of
Yeah.
trend toward it. And I've always wondered about the relationship.
I was never a good social worker, so I always went into politics to cover up.
Why do you say you weren't a good social worker?
I wasn't as fascinated with casework as I was supposed to be.
Who told you that was the way to do it?
Hmm?
Who told you that casework was what social work was about?
Well, they tried to teach me that in school of social work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What did they tell you in the school of social work about politicians?
They hadn't got around to that yet. I think that must have been... I was subjected to a very pious professor of casework. And I listened long enough to know what to put down on the exam, but I didn't believe it. And when I got out, and also maybe I should say this, and it's not, I don't know whether I'm saying it important or not, but we're all our own people. And I'm a people's people. I can deal with people. I currently got a job that needs people's people. I'm a chaplain at the Remand Center downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think anybody can tell anybody else how to be the chaplain at a Remand Center, or except that you got to go in there and you got to somehow or other make your humanness available to their humanness or something. And I think I got somewhere or another I got tired of casework method telling me how I had to make my humanness available to somebody else's humanness. Maybe I should tell you a joke.
Love a joke.
Frank Bach used to be my supervisor over here, and I was the director. I always carried a caseload. And Frank said up at the university they were wanting to have a little session on some new methods of social work, new approaches. So I went back down to our file and hauled out 2 or 3 of your old cases, which read them to them. But I shouldn't be telling you this, but anyway, you didn't know what you were doing, but you were, for the wrong reason, you were doing the right thing. I'm not very orthodox. What else do you want me to tell you about?
Well, I'm interested in what you said about humanness, making your humanness available to others. I think back to some of the other interviews I've done with people who have done casework, and they talk about the ethics committee of their particular local branch of the association telling them that they could not accept a cup of tea from a client or a cold beer on a really, really hot day Now this was in the 30s, mind you. I don't know what it was like when you were in school and during the time that you were doing casework. But there seemed to be, at least at that time, a concerted effort to block the humanness between the worker and the client.
Yeah, we're afraid of it.
They were afraid of it.
I don't know, but it could be that not wanting to block it in as much as saying, how do we handle it? What are we doing? Don't allow them to be human. Or okay, I'm going to tell you something about me. I don't know why. You know anything about me?
Only from the 2 pieces that I've read. No.
Maybe I should tell you something about me to give you some clue. And this can I say this shouldn't go in the record?
Yeah, you want us to turn it off for a minute?
I don't know. You can decide yourself. I don't think it should go in the record.
Well, if you want to turn it off for a minute, we can.
You want this on?
Yeah, true. Because we aren't all little old ladies with white gloves who have no thoughts and feelings and don't want something better for ourselves. So, but it's up to you. If I can get my microphone back on here. Are we rolling again, Don?
Yes.
Father Pat, when we stopped there for a second, we were talking about sharing humanness and how that relates to the profession. Well, I guess 2 things, about how it relates to the profession, but also about how it relates to being effective in what we're trying to do. Can you be effective if you stay objective and if you act as a professional?
I think that if I understand what you're saying, I'd say no. I'd say to be effective, I have to continually be walking the edge of being non-professional. In my current role as a social worker, I suppose I'm the chaplain to the Remand Center in Calgary. And I really feel sympathy for many of the boys. I think I feel more sympathy for the loneliness and despair of their living situation than I do of their actual crime. Their crime is something that gives a little bit of excitement for the court and the lawyer for a few days, and then they're put into this drudgery of days after days with a bland, colorless existence. And I feel sorry that they haven't enough things to do. But they're continually an awareness that the role of a chaplain is something that's got to be very circumspect. And for instance, there are a couple Bonnie and Clydes down there, and they've been in robberies together. And I can see the Clyde, and then I go over and see the Bonnie on the woman's side.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much desire to use me to communicate with each other. And in areas like that, there's so many possibilities. And anyway, maybe in agreeing that you'd like to do it if you could. There's something human, rather than taking a position that, no, it's impossible.
If they ask you to say, would you tell John that I miss him? Is that the kind of thing that you are unable to do?
No, I can do that.
Mm.
But don't try to sneak a note into my pocket with the hope I'll take it out in John's cell when I get over there.
Mm-hmm. And that's part of the line that you have to walk between being circumspect and objective and relating to the humanness of the people.
Mm-hmm. Then there's the fella who thinks he wants to get married, and he's got a girl outside who's agreed to marry him. And you know how lonesome he is, and what a help it would be if he could know that he has a wife. But then you think of the girl's point of view, the long drag, and what's she going to get out of this? And,
What do you do?
I've got to put this in at all levels, of social levels, the same problem. Right up to the top of the family situation. Responsibility versus the need of affection. And of course our poor boys are so neglected. I could often think of Charlotte Whitten and her campaign in Alberta to raise the standard of child care in Alberta and the boarding houses, and how much it was needed, and thank God she did it, but how much is still needed, because down there at the remand center, certainly 85% of the boys and girls have been in foster homes.
Hmm.
And that has repercussions back to what kind of affection and love and security our own children get in our homes as we compared to what's lacking in a foster home.
Mm-hmm.
And what's a foster home besides giving board and room and bed? What else can be given and must be given? Where's the humanness in there?
Yeah, and how do you legislate humanness in, either to our behavior as social workers or a government's behavior toward children? Do you think that can be done? Can it be legislated?
We can just hope that among the senior people in the government agencies are people with heart, and because they're certainly going to be close to writing new legislation, and that they'll listen down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd like to move to a couple general questions, if I might, Father Pat. One is, as you take a look back over the years, your career as a social worker, are there accomplishments that you're particularly pleased about?
I think that I'd have to say that the results that came from our effort in interfaith, setting it up in Calgary, and I don't think I've ever had more pleasure from anything than from that.
Mm-hmm. Are there other things?
I'm not going to say that I got the most fun out of running social credit in the election in 1970. It was too tiring. I thought it was going to be more fun than it was, but I didn't realize until then that politicians work harder than clergymen do, and that I could retire to a clergyman and have a nice, easy life compared to a politician.
A second question that I'd like to ask you relates, I think, well, I'm not sure, I won't say what I think it relates to. The relationship between social work and the priesthood. For you, how have those two things worked together?
I guess that I just took them for granted because I was a priest before I was a social worker, and I just continued to be a priest. Looking back at it, I think that probably priests shouldn't be social workers. That if we're going to educate social workers, we should educate lay people, and that I think that one advantage of lay people being in social work is that they can get married and have their own family, whereas a priest is limited in this experience, and that therefore I don't think a priest is as good a social worker as a layman. As far as there's nothing about the two jobs that aren't compatible, of course.
Mm-hmm.
The maybe the part of the priesthood that which is referred to as celibacy is frustrating. And I don't know whether it would be good to have more frustrated social workers.
I think, from my own point of view, celibacy is one part, but again, getting back to the humanness, I've wondered, in prior days, so many social workers were single women, and they were advising people on how to raise families. They were instructing women on how to get along better with their husband, how to raise their children, how to run their household, and things like that. How could they have known? The relationships that we all deal with, if one isn't married, one doesn't, or hasn't been, one doesn't have those kinds of, I guess, one doesn't have those kinds of relationship experiences, I guess.
Well, I agree with you that generally in the field of social work it would be better if the persons were married.
Well, if they're going to talk about marriage and how to get along with other people, it seems to, but one never knows. And the last question that I wanted to ask you is what it has meant to you to be a professional social worker.
I told you I didn't want to go to the School of Social Work in the first place, that I went against, but I was very pleased as the years developed to be a social worker and to be called a social worker. And I think that as the caliber of social work increased in my community and in my province, I've become more appreciative of what it is to be a social worker.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, in conclusion, Father Pat, are there things that you'd like to add, jokes that you'd like to tell, or stories that you'd like to mention that haven't come to light yet?
I guess not.
Okay. in conclusion, then, I'd like to thank you very much for the time that you've spent with me this afternoon.
Okay, thank you
And,
very much.
I found it informative and helpful, and interesting as well. Your discussion about the human has been very meaningful for me. Thanks.
Well, I'm sorry I'm not very sparkly today. I've got the flu, and I'm kind of dragging.
I'm sorry we've gotten you on a bad day.
Mm.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Tom.
Have you got one of these?
Yeah, I do have the one that you sent me in Jan. Father, you want to describe what that is?
Grant Maxwell from Ottawa came to Calgary in 1974 and met with the board of Calgary Interfaith Community Action Committee, who were deciding to publish a statement of their positions and findings. And Grant did tapes. He taped 6 presidents, and then he went back and re-edited them and transcribed some of them and produced this booklet called Like a Chinook.
Just hold it right there.
Did you see Charles Henry's forward in there?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Cute.
did. Yeah, it is.
I used to be on a lot of committees with Charles in those days.
Okay, go ahead.
The revised Dandelion Manual was published in the 50s, and it was a booklet that taught youth groups how to handle the dandelion programs, which were published out of Claresholm, Alberta, and mailed out weekly to the chairman of 4 committees: spiritual, social, educational, and apostolic.
Oh yeah, that's fine.